How have I made myself captive to this entitled, petulant knobhead, is what Fatima Bhutto wonders in chapter 15 of her latest memoir, The Hour of the Wolf, at exactly 86% mark of the advanced review copy I read, courtesy of the publisher, Scribner. The ARC is in digital format, and so whenever I quote from the book, you'll hear me give the percentage instead of the page number. The entitled petulant knobhead in question is a mystery man Bhutto was involved with and in love with for 10 years from 2010 to 2020, which she refers to as a lost decade in chapter 6 at 39% mark. A relationship that went nowhere while going everywhere. This is the same decade that was most fruitful for her professionally. She launched her career as a published author of non-fiction and fiction books. Her work was translated into various languages. She had successful book tours. She traveled all over the world to write commissioned pieces for well-reputed international magazines and websites. Her Instagram account, created in 2013, shows that she stayed in parts of Peru, Lebanon, Egypt, Iran, Nepal, Pakistan, Netherlands, France, Italy, Spain, America, and the UK. She established herself as a paid speaker. She was in demand as an activist and an interviewee, giving her voice to causes close to her heart. And yet she felt unheard and unappreciated in a dead-end, coercive relationship with a non-committal man who wouldn't have a child with her. How did an intelligent, well-educated, successful, and independent woman settle for something like this? You're going to find out in this book. In chapter 7 at 47% mark, she says, quote, "There is a version of the story that is a love story. I have written drafts of that story before abandoning them," unquote. So the reader will see the lows of how the relationship disintegrated, but not the highs, and she lays out all the red flags that everyone except her saw. She says in chapter 5 at 31% mark that she met him during the book tour for Songs of Blood and Sword when she was 28 years old. She doesn't mention his age, but he is single. She introduces us, the readers, to him in chapter 6 at 34% mark as, quote, "When we met, the man didn't want anything from me. He wasn't intimidated by me. In contrast to almost everyone I encountered, he was preternaturally cool, unruffled, unfazed. He was curious about me, he told me, because he saw I was suffering and he knew he could fix it." The man had a wild confidence, a surety about everything he said that made you believe him too, as outlandish as some of his claims were, that he could take away pain, remove suffering, proffer insight into any problem, no matter how large or how small. Unquote. At 35% mark of chapter 6, quote, "He had many stories in his personal archive of all the women he had helped stand up for themselves, empowering them by engaging and guiding them. He helped me to stand up for myself with other people, insisting I confront them and have uncomfortable conversations in order not to be pushed around. He delighted in his ability to deliver powerful insights to strangers, just as he had helped me with my grief." Unquote. Bhutto is swept off her feet. From her descriptions, he comes across as a learned, confident, fit man of great stamina, who is busy enough to frequently travel for work, and rich enough to drop everything and take up whatever hobby fancies him. As she writes at 38% mark in chapter 6, quote, "He held forth on Buddhism, industrial history, World War II, the Mongols, and counter-espionage tactics. He taught me how to walk against the howling wind and protect myself against the cold, how to catch and free fireflies, and with great resistance on my part, how to ride a motorcycle." Unquote. And she, of course, becomes emotionally attached to him. As she writes at 34% mark in chapter 6, quote, "During our time together, I relied on him the way a student does a teacher or a patient their doctor." Unquote. At 57% mark of the chapter 8, she says, quote, "He could run in sneakers or barefoot, it didn't matter. This was what made him unusually excellent at most things he chose to do. his stamina, fortitude, but most of all, his patience. When he was determined about something, he was tenacious." Unquote. Bhutto trusts him completely, as she recounts the anecdote of how she allowed him to walk her down and up again a countryside hill with her eyes shut and feet completely bare, at 35% mark in Chapter 6. So it will come as a shock to you to find the many instances in which she recounts being coercively controlled by the unnamed man. For one thing, he wanted to remain anonymous, never go public with her, which meant that none of her friends, colleagues, or family members would ever meet him or spend time with him. He's a feminist and he believes in equality, or so he says. But Bhutto pays for everything, even the hormone injections that she needs for producing enough eggs so that they can be extracted and frozen for future eventual maybe babies before her biological clock runs out. And she's the one who pays for maintaining them in a freezer in a clinic as well. You'll read with horror the intimate details of Bhutto's attempt to inject her stomach and weeks later to go through the procedure requiring general anesthesia in a Barcelona clinic to retrieve the eggs, a process she calls exit in Chapter 8 at 55% mark. Her boyfriend makes up an excuse to not be there for any of it and tells her about this difficult and fear-inducing process that if it doesn't work, quote, "you can do it again in 5 years," unquote, at 57% mark of Chapter 8, Day 11. He also thinks that her dog Coco is like a daughter to him, at 82% mark of Chapter 13. I wish Bhutto had been a bit more transparent about their long-distance arrangement on where he lived or whether he was in the same field as her, because it felt like where he was having his cake and eating it too, and she was left to pick up the pieces of his free-bird nature, arrogance or rudeness or absence. He who is not named or identified in any discernible manner is written as an insufferable twat. He disses her writing, undermines her nomination for an award, and goads her to leave friends that he thinks are insincere. At 47% mark of Chapter 7, she writes, and this is something that women will identify with, quote, "I never pushed too hard though, partly because I was victim to the same rotten thinking that plagues so many women, that this would pass, and it would pass because I could change him," unquote. And at 48% mark of Chapter 7, she continues, quote, "By year 7, this logic, that she could change him, took on a new, slightly manic overtone. When I had outrun reason, I started to pray, and I visited shrines and temples on my travels. Allegra and I drove all day one summer in Italy to see the shrine of Saint Rita, saint of impossible causes. I bought crystals, I wore talismans, I took vitamins. If I couldn't convince the man that 7 years was a terrible amount of time to make a woman wait to have a baby, then God would persuade him, or the dynamic power of tourmaline, or chanting. By my late 30s, I could think of nothing else. I drove myself crazy with a ragged determination to blame everything except my decision to stay with the man for my failure to have a family. I looked up surahs and listened to Alan Watts and Thich Nhat Hanh. They are coaches for mindful meditation. I channeled my frustration into writing. I exercised. I tumbled into a deep depression and stopped eating, seeing people. I lost weight. I started eating again. I injured myself running. I stopped exercising. I stopped eating chocolate, renouncing it as an offering to the universe in exchange for what I wanted. Chocolate in exchange for my life's dream. I ran away. I hid. I studied my horoscope. I wrote gratitude lists. At the height of my desperation, at the age of 38, I called an astrologer a friend swore by. I asked her to do a chart for the whole year, and when she asked me if there was anything in particular I was interested in knowing about, I didn't hedge. Will I have a child? After a week or so, the astrologer sent me a recording and prefaced the year's forecast by gently telling me that she didn't see anything to do with children, or much else for that matter. Unquote. Here is the entire gamut of psychological roller coaster that gaslit people go through. Privilege does not protect you from being vulnerable or from becoming emotionally dependent and trying to manifest a different outcome when you have invested so much time in a man. Plenty of women have fallen for this and will identify with Bhutto, but only to a certain extent. Because Bhutto mourns the loss of a future she thought she'd have with this boyfriend without real-world problems or therapeutic adventures. She doesn't mention any mental health or wellness intervention that she may have sought. Maybe the act of writing this book and exercising the past was revelatory therapy for her. Because as a financially independent woman with no strings or contracts, legal or moral, attaching her to this nameless boyfriend, it was easy for her to let go. Reading the book, one feels that she simply grew tired of waiting, and when she faced an endless impasse of him not wanting to plant roots and have kids with her, wasting her time, with no new resolution and no greater intimacy, hating him and resenting him, all pretense gone, she makes a clean break from him, and remarkably does not suffer the ignominy and awkwardness of meeting him in her circle, professional or personal thereafter, because it had been a secret private relationship. The anonymity of the man remains intact, with no possibility of his side of the story, a la James Hewitt or Hasnat Khan or Prince Charles of Diana fame, and counter-accusations like those made by Ijaz Rahman against Reham Khan. The possibility of him answering uncomfortable questions like the politician Mustafa Kar on the memoir of his ex-wife Tehmina Durrani is non-existent. The chance he may capitalize and try to make a quick buck over Fatima Bhutto's activist celebrity status remains. The chance of him having a kid with someone else is more than likely, because men don't have a biological clock. The book's title is derived from Ingmar Bergman's film, Hour of the Wolf, and was suggested to her by one of her friends. At 75% mark in chapter 12, she writes, quote, Ingmar Bergman's 1968 film Hour of the Wolf is about an artist who has a breakdown while on a secluded island with his wife. It takes place mostly between midnight and dawn, at the time when people are supposed to lay down their worries for rest. Bergman calls this time in the dark of the night the hours of the wolf. It is when most people die, when sleep is the deepest, when nightmares are more real. It is when the sleepless are haunted by the deepest fear, when ghosts and demons are most powerful. The hour of the wolf is also the hour when most children are born, Bergman says. I think about this at night, lying in the sleepless dark. I was born during the hours of the wolf. I don't know when exactly. There is no one I can ask. Unquote. Maybe through this title, Bhutto means to say that her lost decade was the hour of the wolf, a time when she was dying in the relationship and then was reborn once she left it. And she stayed firm in this resolution, even when he tried to insinuate himself back in her life. You'll rejoice when you find out at the end of the book that she not only got married to another man called Graham Gibran Byra, but was 5 months pregnant when she finished this book. Their first son, whom she named Mir in memory of her father, was born when she was 42. Her second son, Caspian Mustafa, was born last year. Her Instagram feed has pictures of her husband and the wedding. She has also shared pictures of a baby in the arms of her brother. This book is not just about a bad relationship, but also about finding roots and comfort in extended family, which in Bhutto's case comprised of her girlfriends, Allegra, Hortensia, and Sophie, who were there for her when the man wasn't, and her Jack Russell Terrier, Coco, and the dog's offsprings, the one that was stillborn during COVID-19 lockdown, given in heart-rending detail in Chapter 3 at 17% mark, and the puppies from another pregnancy, Teeny, Stelena, Caro, Tokyo, whose birth she witnesses in Chapter 12 at 77% mark, as well as the adoption of a Dachshund. At 79% mark in Chapter 12, she writes, quote, I didn't expect to learn this much about love or God or grace from any of this. That is when she's caring for the puppies. I didn't expect to be so moved by the simple act of care. Unquote. Dog lovers and animal lovers will rejoice at Bhutto's treatment and conversations about her dogs as if they are human beings. She writes at 77% mark of the same chapter, that is chapter 12, about how her friend Allegra blessed the newborns in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, as per Christian tradition, and Bhutto, quote, whispered the azan in the puppy's ears, echoing Muslim tradition that sings the call to prayer in a newborn's ear after birth, so it is the first sound they hear, unquote. And when the puppies are 3 years old, while out on a walk with them, she meets a priest talking to two brothers, and these three people then sing the Franciscan blessing for the animals to them, as told at 90% mark in the epilogue. Her Insta account is littered with pictures of Coco and her puppies. The book is strongest in the elements that I've covered so far, but Bhutto provides nothing more than word salad on nature and climate change. Her verbiage on deers, ants, and wolves seems derivative and inspired from iconic books such as H is for Hawk, a book that she recommends on her Insta account. As to this book's place in celeb memoirs, the Bhutto dynasty is splintered into two groups. The children of Benazir Bhutto, who actively take part in elections and politics, making and breaking alliances, etc., that is, Asafa Bhutto Zardari, groomed and styled in the image of a murdered mother, is an elected parliamentarian and serving as the First Lady of Pakistan, while her father is the president, and Bilawal Bhutto Zardari is the country's foreign minister, something that Zede Bhutto was once too, and is heading Bhutto political party. Their sibling Bakhtavar Bhutto joins them on occasion, but has been busy raising her family in UAE. The other group is that of the children of Mir Murtaza Bhutto, who have chosen for now not to be part of the political or democratic or any hybrid process. These include Fatima Bhutto and her brother. She generated a lot of buzz in Pakistani media in 2019 when she abruptly went to Larkana, Sindh, and laid wreaths on the graves of the murdered, assassinated, hanged Bhuttos. It was seen as a sign of her entry into politics before general elections, but nothing came of it. In a rapidly changing world, it's an interesting dynamic to have two sets of young leaders, some would say nepo political kids, who take different roads to political engagement. The distance from active politics gives Fatima Bhutto and Zede Bhutto Jr. freedom to say and do and live their truth without the inconvenience of being answerable to anyone. However, electoral process and resultant alliances limits and binds Asafa Bhutto, Bilawal Bhutto, and even the non-political Bakhtavar Bhutto to accountability, judgment, and criticism. The rigid, official, and aristocratic airs of Benazir Bhutto's children are offset by the casual rag-a-tag grassroots PR campaigns launched by Murtaza Bhutto's kids, the doers versus the idealists. Though in recent years, Fatima Bhutto and Zede Bhutto Jr. have stepped up their visibility and charitable work in Pakistan. Through this book, Fatima Bhutto goes a step further. She makes herself relevant to the young generation looking for authentic idols by talking about her disaster in dating and disappointment in love. Her story is relatable to women because she talks about coercive control, gender inequality, motherhood, fertility treatment and its side effects, all of which are hot-button trending issues. Her soulful connection with her dog is relatable to everyone who has or ever had a pet. Maybe in a few years she'll write about perimenopause and menopause and explain what options, medical, herbal, or meditative, she chose for flourishing in her 50s. Another non-electoral connection to the masses as a global citizen.